Let's talk to Ross Clark, writer with The Sun, The Telegraph and The Spectator, of course, as well. Ross, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I speak to you the day after they've shut down Port Talbot's latest steelworks. I think the last steelworks that was actually creating steel in this country. It's not going to be able to do anything for the next 4 years, and then it might be able to make some steel which is recycled. But basically, the government's given Tata money to go and open a steel plant and a foundry and a steel sort of furnace, if you like, in India.
Yes, well, this is the sad thing, and the tragic thing about net zero is that it's given governments a perverse incentive to close down heavy industry in Britain and import the goods instead, because when we count Britain's carbon emissions, we only count what are called territorial emissions. That's those physically spewed out in Britain.
Right.
We don't count the emissions elsewhere in the world, emitted in the cause of making consumer products, food and everything else for UK consumers. So, if you're your aim is to get Britain to net zero at the earliest possible date, then closing a steelworks in Wales makes perfect sense. But of course, it doesn't help the planet, because it just transfers the emissions to the other side of the world. And but at the same time, it destroys jobs in Britain, destroys our industry here.
Well, that's right. And all the people that we've seen being interviewed down there have said that, for generations, families have worked there. The men of Port Talbot have had only one business, and that's been working in the steel plant. And now they don't really know what else they can do. And they're all saying, well, it's all very well talking about renewable energy. They're going to put some windmills in the sea off the coast of Wales, but that's not going to happen for about 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the trouble of industrial declines. We found out in the 1980s, and before that, the 1930s, is, so much heavy industry. It really dominates the local area. It's, by far a factory can employ the majority of the town. Coal mines used to employ the whole of the colliery village virtually. And when you take out an industrial plant like Port Talbot, you're causing huge problems for the local area. That's 2,800 jobs will be gone. Now, we're promised in about 4 or 5 years' time that we could have an electric arc furnace there, which may employ some of those people. But, look at from the industrial strategy point of view, that electric arc furnace will not be doing the same job as the blast furnace, which closed yesterday, was doing, because steel making's a two-part process. You have to turn the iron ore into pig iron, and then the pig iron into finished steel. Well, electric arc furnace can help you with the second bit, but it can't do the first bit. So, we are losing what was called the primary steel industry.
Right. So it's a recycling.
It's
a recycling business, basically, isn't it? It's taking somebody else's steel. So you have to buy the steel from elsewhere in order to then treat it in the plant. So, I mean, it's a kind of hiding to nothing. Also, yesterday, the UK stopped producing any electricity at all from burning coal. 142 years of that, which did pretty well for most of us. They've now decided that's a bad idea. So the last power station, I think, driven by coal, Ratcliffe-on-Soar, finishes operations on Monday.
Yes, well, coal is a dirty fuel. It kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour, it emits about twice as much carbon dioxide as does gas, and obviously coal is also implicated in acid rain through the sulfur dioxide emitted from those stations. So, I mean, in some ways, it's a good thing that we are no longer burning coal. But if anybody thinks this is the end of coal globally, and Lord Deben yesterday popped up saying, oh, this will inspire the world to take Britain's lead. Well, as of last year, coal use around the world reached an all-time high. It's increased by about a third in the past decade. China still derives 60% of its electricity from coal. India, 75%. The world as a whole is still burning vast amounts of coal, and for good reason, because it is it's a cheap fuel. It's a fuel that's very easy to transport and to store. And so it is very practical, as a lot of countries like India don't have gas reserves. So,
it's also very, very effective and very efficient as a heating source. I mean, I moved into a house. I bought a house in Wiltshire many years ago, and much to my delight, discovered that there was a coal bunker sort of at the bottom of the garden full of coal, which I hadn't bought, but I thought, oh, this is good. I'll see if I can try and chuck that on the fire and see. And it was incredible. I don't think I've ever been so warm in my life. I mean, it's so much warmer than anything else you've ever dealt with.
Yes, it's a very good backup as well, and this is what we've been using. I mean, over the past couple of decades, we've moved from being sort of generating most of our electricity from coal to a mixture of gas and renewables, and that's sort of fairly clean and it works. But what happened after the Ukraine invasion? Of course, gas prices soared. Now, had that invasion happened a decade earlier, when we still had a large number of coal plants, we wouldn't have been nearly as affected, because you remember what Mrs. Thatcher did before the miners' strike in 1984, stockpiled huge amounts of coal, which managed, kept the lights on throughout that 11-month strike.
Yeah.
And by dumping coal, we've lost that facility, even though it might be beneficial from an environmental point
and
of
also,
view.
isn't it the case that Germany has decided to go back to coal after their sort of disastrous incursion with Russian gas? And they've started, in addition to reopening some of their nuclear plants, they've actually gone back to coal mining. And Poland, of course, very famously, still uses an awful lot of coal and still mines an awful lot of coal. So even in Europe, it hasn't been given up on altogether. I mean, Ed Miliband's kind of craze for net zero is going to bankrupt this country, isn't it?
Well, coal was the saviour of Germany a couple of years ago. They were able to reopen coal mines. And last year, Germany, over a quarter of electricity in Germany was generated by coal. In Poland, it's 60%. So, yes, I mean, European countries too are certainly still burning coal. And, as I say, it was very cheap and very versatile fuel. So we lose something when we do away with it. And this morning, EDF is warning that the national grid faces severe problems in future. It works towards Miliband's target of decarbonising the grid by 2030, because we're losing base load. Nuclear stations are closing down. We've only got one in the pipeline that can, they're not going to replace the ones that closed down. We've lost our coal stations, and Miliband wants to close the gas stations too. So, all that sort of backup, all the base load is going. And what do you do to cope with the intermittency of wind and solar? Well, Miliband still has not answered that question. And, we are heading for a big energy crunch unless that problem is solved in the very near future.
Yeah, absolutely right. I can't understand this sort of headlong absolute race to nowhere where we seem to be heading, and nobody seems to be stopping it. At least under the Tories, they promised things, but they sort of kind of knew they couldn't deliver them. But Miliband has got this kind of zeal about him. He's got this kind of cult-like attachment to net zero, and he feels as though it's some kind of crusade that he's on. I mean, another piece of evidence about the problems with electric cars and all the rest of it coming in today from America, where Hurricane Helene apparently has been wreaking havoc, not just with people losing their lives, but with electric cars, because salt water, apparently, when it has been flooding various parts of Georgia and North Carolina, is making electric cars blow up.
Yes, well, lithium batteries, the fire risk is well known, and we've had sort of numerous cases of where, not just cars, but, electric bikes being recharged, electric e-scooters and so on, of course, fatal fires, people charging them indoors. It is a very serious risk. Now, car batteries don't need to be lithium. There are alternatives. There are safer alternatives. But this is the trouble with the sort of rush to net zero. Is we keep on grabbing at the sort of wrong technologies, the sort of technologies which might be the best available at one moment, but then a few years down the line they become obsolete, and you have to start again. And the only way to sort of do this, the process of decarbonisation, is really to allow technologies to prove themselves, to overcome their problems, give them space, give them the space to breathe, and let them compete. And the trouble is, at the moment, because of the unseemly speed at which the government's trying to get to net zero, we just end up grabbing at the wrong technologies. And, lithium car batteries are an example of that.
Absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Ross. Thanks very much indeed. Ross Clark there from The Sun, The Telegraph, writer for The Spectator, of course, as well.